Good morning, folks. Mr. Dald is here to continue on with our reading series. This will be Chapter 11, Section 4, Societies in Medieval Africa. Your focus question for this section is what factors influenced the development of society in Africa? Societies in Medieval Africa. Considering Africa's immense size, it is not surprising that Ibn Battuta came across new cultures. Factors such as Africa's varied geography, diverse climates, and later migration and trade played major roles in how early societies developed throughout the continent. As you read, throughout the New World, the Neolithic Revolution led to the beginning of settled farm communities located in areas with fertile soil and proximity to water. These farming settlements grew as surpluses increased, enabling artisans to develop specialized skills. Advancements in transportation, such as the use of the camel, increased the community's reach beyond its borders, and this exchange allowed villages to grow into towns. Extended trade brought additional wealth, leading to the creation of individual states and kingdoms. Throughout Africa, communities varied in size, environment, and economics. However, each society, including the kingdoms you read about earlier in this chapter, developed around four common elements: family, government, religion, and art. Family patterns. In medieval Africa, as elsewhere, the family was the basic unit of society. Patterns of the family life varied greatly depending on the culture of the group. In some societies, for example, the basic family unit was the nuclear family, or parents and children living and working together as a unit. In other communities, family units included the extended family, parents, children, and several generations such as grandparents and uncles, who lived and worked close together to ensure the success of the group. Kinship. Family organization varied in other ways. Some families were patrilineal. In these families, important kinship ties, such as inheritance, were passed through the father's side. Other families, such as ones described by Ibn Battuta, were matrilineal, with inheritance traced through the mother's side. In some cultures, one spouse would move to the other spouse's village and join his or her parents' family. Matrilineal cultures forged strong ties between brothers and sisters. Brothers were expected to protect their sisters, and sons were expected to help their brothers whenever needed. Extended lineages. Each family belonged to a lineage, or a group of households who claim a common ancestor. Several lineages formed a clan that traced its descent to an even more remote and often legendary ancestor. Belonging to a particular family, lineage, or clan gave people a sense of community with shared responsibility to that community. An individual's place in some medieval African society was also determined by a system of age grades. An age grade included all girls or boys born in the same year. Each age grade had particular responsibilities and privileges. As they moved up from one age grade to another, children began to take part in village activities, which created social ties beyond the family. Checkpoint. How did kinship help identify an individual's place in his or her society? Please take a moment and answer that question. Political patterns. Most medieval African farming peoples lived in tight-knit communities and helped one another in tasks such as clearing the land, planting, and harvesting. As communities grew, the need for a form of government arose. Throughout Africa, political patterns varied, depending in part on the size and culture of the community. Power sharing. Unlike the large kingdoms, smaller medieval African societies were often organized with power shared among a number of people rather than centralized in the hands of a single leader. In some villages, a chief had a good deal of authority, but in many others, elders made the major decisions. In some places, especially in parts of West Africa, women took the dominant role in the marketplace or acted as official peacemakers in the village. Villages often made decisions by a process known as consensus, or general agreement. In open discussions, people whose opinions were valued voiced their views before a final agreement was reached. Because of the experience and wisdom of older men and women, their opinions usually carried the greatest weight. In villages that were part of a large kingdom, such as Songhai, decisions made at a distant court had to be obeyed. The villagers, therefore, had to pay taxes and provide soldiers to the central and frequently distant government. Limited power. Another form of government developed when many villagers were grouped into districts and provinces that were governed by officials appointed by a king. The Kingdom of Congo, which flourished around AD 1500 in Central Africa, is an example. There, each village still had its own chief. Taxes were collected through local governors, either in goods or in cowrie shells, a common African currency. Unlike rulers of larger West African states who maintained strong standing armies, the kings of Congo could only call upon men to fight in times of need. In fact, the king was actually chosen by a group of electors and had to govern according to traditional laws. It might seem as though the king wielded absolute power. However, in some societies, like the Kingdom of the Congo, the monarch's power was somewhat limited. Checkpoint. How was ruling power shared in some of the smaller African societies? Religious beliefs. As you have read, religion played an important role in the development of medieval African societies. Religious beliefs that existed before the arrival of Islam and Christianity were varied and complex. Like the Hindus or ancient Greeks and Romans, some Africans worshipped many gods and goddesses. They identified the forces of nature with divine spirits and tried to influence those forces through rituals and ceremonies. Many African peoples believed that a single, unknowable supreme being stood above all other gods and goddesses. This supreme being was the creator and ruler of the universe and was helped by the lesser spirits who were closer to the people. Some African peoples believed, like the Chinese, that the spirits of their ancestors could help, warn, or punish their descendants on earth. Just as Christians in medieval Europe called for the saints for help, medieval Africans turned to the spirits of their departed ancestors. By AD 1000, both Christianity and Islam had spread to many regions of Africa. Those who adopted those religions often associated the God of the Christians and Muslims with their traditional supreme being. In this way, Christianity and Islam in Africa absorbed many local practices and beliefs. Checkpoint. Describe the religious beliefs in medieval Africa. Take a moment to answer that question, and then continue. Traditions in art and literature. African artistic traditions extended far back in time to the ancient rock paintings of the Sahara, which were created by about 1000 BC, and the over 4,000-year-old pyramids of Egypt and Nubia. More recently, but still about 1,000 years ago, the rock churches of Ethiopia and the Palace of Great Zimbabwe were built. These accomplishments bear lasting witness to the creative power of these early and medieval civilizations. Creative arts. African artists worked in many materials, including gold, ivory, wood, bronze, and cloth. They created many decorative items such as woven cloth, inscribed jugs and bowls, or jewelry simply for their beauty. Even so, art usually served social and religious purposes as well. Art strengthened bonds within the community and linked the makers and the users of the work. Patterns used to decorate textiles, baskets, and swords and other objects had important meanings or special messages that the artisan or owner wanted to convey. Often they identified an object as a work of a particular clan or the possession of royalty. One example is kente cloth, a traditional West African textile woven of silk and cotton. When it was made in bright gold and blue colors, the symbol of power, only the ruling elite and the wealthy were allowed to wear it. In medieval Africa, as elsewhere, much art was closely tied to religion. Statues and other objects were used in religious rites and ceremonies. In some rituals, for example, leaders wore elaborately carved masks decorated with cowrie shells or grass. Once the mask was in place, Both the wearer and the viewers could feel the presence of the spiritual force it represented. Literature. Early and medieval African societies preserved their histories and values through both written and oral literature. Ancient Egypt, Nubia, and Axum left written records of their past. Later, Arabic provided a common written language in those parts of Africa influenced by Islam. African Muslim scholars gathered in cities such as Timbuktu and Kilwa. Documents in Arabic offer invaluable evidence about the law, religion, and history of the time. Oral traditions date back many centuries. In West Africa, griots, or professional storytellers, recited ancient stories such as the Sundiata epic. The griots preserved both histories and traditional folktales in the same way that the epics of Homer or Aryan India were passed orally from generation to generation. The histories praised the heroic deeds of famous ancestors or kings. The folktales, which blended fanciful stories with humor and sophisticated wordplay, taught important moral lessons. Oral literature, like religion and art, thus encouraged a sense of community and common values within the medieval societies of Africa. Checkpoint. How did African societies preserve their history? That's the end of the Section 4 reading. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.